Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, we'll discuss a very interesting topic, namely that when you have a target, for example, an idea to give a checkmate, but for the time being, if you move to that square, your piece that's about to give checkmate will be captured. Or there may be other targets that you'd like to accomplish, but there is just one defender. We discussed already in one of the previous lessons situations when you're trying to deflect a defender, remove the guard. In this case, we'll see a different idea, namely to close up a file, rank, or diagonal. Well, let me show you the first example to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Here we go. In this position, again, the first thing to recognize is the material balance in the position. It's very obvious that each side has one queen and two rooks each. It's also noticeable that black, on the other hand, has an extra knight. So black is a piece ahead, while white has one extra pawn. Generally speaking, that's a significant advantage for black and most of the time a winning advantage. However, here the situation is not quite as simple. And the reason for that is that the black king is in a somewhat delicate position because the G pawn is gone, is no longer defending the black king. And in fact, white's queen on G5 is ready for attack and is almost ready to give checkmate on G7. However, it's only almost because at the moment the black queen guards that key and the important square. That means if the white queen would move to G7 right now, the black queen would simply capture that, and as a result of this combination, white would simply lose a pawn and exchange a pair of queens. When you are behind in material and are attacking, the last thing you'd be looking to do is to trade queens. So looking at this starting position again, let's try to look for a way to make that queen G7 move to become checkmate. Well, one option could be if we could force that black queen to move from where it is. But in this particular case, we cannot really accomplish that. On the other hand, we can block up its power on the 7th rank. And let me show you the solution to this challenge. The correct move is to move the rook to E7. At first it seems that this is a bad move because the black knight can capture it. Normally that would be the case. However, in this case, if indeed the black knight captures the rook, then instead of recapturing, white would immediately end the game by checkmate. So as we can see, what happened was the black queen remained in its initial square. However, we tempted or forced another piece onto the 7th rank, and therefore the black queen, no longer protected that key G7 square. So this is another pattern that I strongly suggest you remember, that you're closing up a certain file or rank by giving up one of your own important and valuable pieces in order to accomplish a higher goal, which in this case is to checkmate. If instead the black queen moves away, things don't really change, white will still checkmate. And if black would try to defend by counterattacking, Then of course white would not capture the queen, which would just result in an exchange of the queens and in a winning position for black. But now the newly freed up square on f6 is available for the white queen, as black's rook is no longer on f8. This checks the black king, forces the black rook to block, and then simply queen captures rook, checkmate. Let's move on to our next example. Here we go. In this position, again, let's evaluate the situation. We can see that each side has the two rooks and each side has a bishop. In fact, the bishops are of opposite colors. When we get to the pawns, we'll realize that black has one more, having 4 pawns versus white's 3 pawns. After we recognize the material balance, the next thing immediately should be to look out for the safety of the kings. And in this case, white can almost checkmate in a very traditional way by using the two rooks. One of the rooks, the one on g1, is making sure that the black king remains at the edge of the board on h8. In fact, if it were black's turn right now, black should immediately try to move his rook to g8, offering an exchange of rooks. But it is white's turn in this position. And the first thing we should try to do is to move that second rook from b2 to h2. However, always remember to look out for the best defense for your opponent, not only looking for your own good moves. And in fact, if white right now would move the rook to h2, that would be a very serious blunder, because the black bishop from c7 would simply capture it. So what should white do to still accomplish the goal? Again, here we cannot lure away the black bishop from c7, the bishop that controls that crucial square on h2. However, what white is able to do is, again, to interpose a pawn, give it up, sacrifice it, but while black is busy to react to this move, which does attack the black bishop, and now whether the black bishop moves away from the attack or black captures the pawn on d6, in any case, white is ready to checkmate on h2. Let's move on and see our next example on the same theme. Here we go. In this position, again, let's check out the material balance. We have a rook each, bishop versus knight, which is roughly even, and as of the number of pawns, it's also even for each. It is black's turn in this position, and that makes, of course, a very big difference. We can notice that the black pieces are rather active, the black rook being on g8, locking the white king into the corner. And the black knight is nicely centralized on e4 and would be almost ready to checkmate with knight f2 if white's bishop from b6 would not control that key square. So as you can see, the first step to a correct solution is to recognize things about the situation that are important. In this particular case, the important part is the idea of checkmating with the knight. Attacking that bishop, for example, by playing rook b8 would not be a great idea, because now the rook is no longer on g8 and therefore the white king is not in any kind of checkmate threat whatsoever. So white would be free to remove the bishop from the attack, whether moving the bishop to c7 or e3. In any case, white would be doing okay. In our position here, also, the key idea is to close up the diagonal where the white bishop on b6 is so successfully controlling that crucial f2 square where the black knight would like to move to. And in reality, if black here finds the correct move, black will reach a winning position. In this case, black makes a simple move that closes up the bishop's defense towards the f2 square by playing c6 to c5. A very simple and quiet move. The white rook is far away, cannot get to f2 or to control that square, and the bishop can neither, other than sacrificing itself for just one single pawn. Of course, this would give black a significant material advantage and eventual win. Let's move on to our next example. Here we go. In this position, it is black's turn. And if we count the material balance, we'll recognize that white is an exchange up. That is a significant advantage, especially when it comes to endgames. Similarly to the last example, we can notice that the black rook is in the very powerful position on g8, locking in the white king into the corner. Unlike in the last example, here black does not have a knight, and therefore there is no knight f2 threat like we saw in the last example. However, black has a bishop that could be potentially causing harm to white's king if that bishop would successfully get to the long a8 h1 diagonal. However, if black would attempt to do that right away by moving the bishop to d5, almost checkmating the white king, would not be a good idea because the white rook from a5 could immediately hit it, capture it. So again, in this position, what black needs to do is look for a way to cut out the rook from a5. Here again, there is no way to deflect that rook directly. However, there is a way to minimize its power. And the correct move here is for black to play b5. Here, as we can see, black has successfully closed up the fifth rank, and because the white rook is in an unfortunate position on d1, cannot make any move that would control the d5 square. White is in serious trouble right now and will be checkmated. It's interesting to point out also that white is suffering more because they have an extra pawn on h3. If white would not have that pawn on h3, then the pawn from h2 could advance to h4, opening up an escape window for the white king on h2. But in this particular case, the pawn is there, and therefore white is helpless against black's upcoming bishop move to d5. Let's move on to our next example. Here we go. In this position, it is white's turn. And white has a pretty powerful position, having his queen and bishop lined up on the same diagonal, targeting the pawn on f7, of course, not just trying to win a pawn, but more importantly trying to give checkmate. The only black piece that is in white's way is the black queen on f5. If that queen would not be there, the checkmate would be immediate. But it is protecting the pawn. Here again, white has a good opportunity not to deflect the queen, but to interpose between the queen, the black queen on f5, and the key square, the key pawn on f7. And white does not mind to lose even a very valuable piece such as a rook. And therefore, the correct solution is to move the rook from a6 to f6. If the black queen captures the rook, obviously white captures that with a pawn, resulting in a winning position for white. On the other hand, if black captures the rook with the pawn, then already all of a sudden the black queen no longer guards that pawn on f7 and white is ready to capture it. The queen is protected by the bishop on a2 and it is game over. Let's move on to our next example. Here we go. In this position, the story is a bit different because we are not talking about any ideas to checkmate. We are talking of options to win material such as a queen or a rook or an exchange. It's true that white is a pawn up, however that pawn is doubled and we are in an endgame where oftentimes only one extra pawn, all the pawns being on the same side of the board, may not be enough to actually win the game. However, if white would be able to gain material, then of course white would have excellent chances to win. And here the story is that while the black rook protects the black queen on f5, white has an opportunity to interpose between the black rook and queen, and that will result immediate material loss for black. Did you find the move? If you didn't yet, take a bit more time, at least another 3 to 5 minutes, and try to figure out that key move that will break the collaboration between black's rook and queen. And that key move is moving the knight to f6. Very importantly, it is a check. Now, if the black king moves out of it, or black responds by capturing the knight with the pawn, then the black queen will be falling and white won significant material. Black's best choice is to capture the knight with the rook, because then the rook is protecting the queen. However, in that case, white will simply capture the rook, and it's clear that white is an exchange up with a much superior position. Let's move on to the next example. This looks like a tricky position because even though the black queen seems to be under attack, with all reality it's not at the moment because the pawn on h3 is pinned. Also, at the same token, black is threatening checkmate in one move, so white better pays attention to avoid that. Also, the material balance is turning to black's favor. Black is 2 pawns up. The good news for white is that there is a discovery in the air. And as I mentioned earlier, discovered checks are rather important. In this case, white can use to his advantage a very important discovered check that will disconnect the protection of the black bishop towards the black queen. And here white is using a discovery by moving the knight to f5. So on one hand, white created a discovered check, which black needs to react to, whether by moving his king or moving another piece. And then at the same time, what we accomplished is that the black bishop on d7 no longer directly protects the queen on g4. And now, the following move, simply queen captures queen with a easily winning position for white. Let's move on. Here we go. In this position again, there is complete material balance. Yet it's quite visible even with the open eye that white has the initiative. The reason why that is that white has a queen on h6, which is certainly threatening looking, and white has a fork in the works, meaning that if the white knight would be able to go to f7 without being captured, black would be in a whole lot more trouble than they are right now. But the question is, what is that key move that accomplishes all of white's goals? Here again, there is an interposing move, and that key move is moving the white rook to e8. A very impressive move. If the black bishop is the one that captures the rook, then checkmate comes right away with queen takes rook. If after rook e8, black chooses to capture the rook with the rook, then all of a sudden we accomplished our goal to giving a fork by knight to f7. Let's move on to our next beautiful example. This is a perfect illustration when there are two pieces trying to guard a promotion square of two different pieces. How can you come to that middle point and then either white piece captures the bishop, one of the two pawns get promoted. And that absolutely impressive, beautiful move is moving the bishop to c3 into an attack from both sides. However, white would capture with either side, with either the rook or the bishop. That will mean that the blockade of both pawns will no longer exist, because if bishop takes, the pawn on c1 will promote right away, or if the rook captures, then the rook blocks up the other promotion square on c1, and this will result again in a winning position for black. And let's see our final position of the lesson. Here we go. In this position, black has a clear material advantage, but white has a number of pawns. What's important here is that to promote one of the two pawns. Learning from the very previous example, it's not going to be terribly hard to figure out the correct solution right now. We again need to interpose so black will not comfortably stop the e-pawn with the rook and the c-pawn with the bishop. Now comes a very impressive move, knight to e6. And if rook captures, the c-pawn promotes, or if bishop captures, then the e-pawn promotes. Black has no defense. The position is completely lost. Well, hopefully this gave you a good idea on how to use this pattern of closing up a file, rank, or diagonal to your favor, whether to give checkmate or win material, or as we saw in the last two examples, on how to promote the passed pawns when seemingly they are caught. Thank you for listening, and Hope to have you back next week to learn some more chess ideas. So long until then.